About sleep. So, you know that when I can bring up a quote from a number of hundreds of years ago, that it must be important. So, this is from Henry IV, Part 2. William Shakespeare writes, "O sleep, O gentle sleep, nature's soft nurse, how have I frighted thee, that though no more will weigh mine eyelids down, and sleep my senses in forgetfulness." So even back then, there was an issue with getting enough sleep. It seems as though no matter what we do, no matter what conditions we're in, we could just never seem to get enough sleep. And today we're going to talk about sleep problems and sleep deprivation. It does affect memory, cognition, motivation, and its long-term effects are compounded when it's not treated. We're going to talk a little bit about adolescents and students, particularly high school students in college and university, but certainly this is something that goes well beyond university, even into adulthood and older patients as well. 87% of high school students, however, for instance, in the United States, get far less than the recommended 8 to 10 hours of sleep, and the amount of sleep time that they're getting is actually getting less and worse, actually. There was a recent study that was published in France that showed that adults were only getting the amount of sleep on the basis of about 10%. So 10% of the people were getting enough sleep. And when they followed them prospectively, those 10% that were getting enough sleep had 75% less incidence of cardiovascular complications. That's pretty impressive. But again, this is an issue not just for old folk, but also for young folk who are in school and are under a lot of stress and have to get a lot of homework assignments done. They become sleep deprived. And in fact, 55% of all fall asleep crashes were caused by drivers under the age of 25. So it's definitely an issue. And research has shown that sleep problems in adolescents are a risk factor for suicide, death by suicide, and this ranks pretty high in terms of fatalities among 15 to 24-year-olds. And there's a pretty strong link between drug, alcohol use, and depression and suicide and things of that nature. So why is this the case, and what can we do about it? We've got to learn a little bit about sleep in particular. So sleep is not an on-off switch. It's actually regulated by two different systems. And those two systems are represented here by the circadian rhythm, which is in red, and homeostasis system, which is in green. And you can see here we've got 12 o'clock midnight, 3 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, 9, 12 noon, 3 o'clock, 6, 9, and then finally 12 midnight once again. And we can see here, this is the early morning darkness that we're supposed to be sleeping, and then this is the late evening darkness. And let's look at the green one first. Very important for you to understand that while you're sleeping, there is this homeostatic drive that you're taking care of. Kind of like when you're eating, you're getting rid of hunger. When you're sleeping, you're getting rid of this chemical called adenosine, which is lowered. And as soon as you start to wake up in the morning, that chemical adenosine starts to climb throughout the day until finally it reaches a peak, which helps you go to sleep, and then it sort of comes back down again. So this adenosine molecule is a marker of a homeostatic, which means, if you're thirsty, you drink. If you're hungry, you eat. If you're short of breath, you breathe. It's kind of like that, the more you do, the less you need to do of that thing. But if that were the only issue, if that were the only thing that was governing sleep, then you would feel the most well-rested in the morning, and you would just get gradually sleepier as you go throughout the day. And that's clearly not the case. And that's why it's important to understand the second one, which is the red, which is the circadian rhythm. So as we go up on this y-axis, that increases the urge to sleep. Notice what happens when you get up is that there is a reduction in that urge from a circadian rhythm standpoint. A little bit of a bump here between 1, 2, and 3 in the afternoon. That may be the reason why some cultures have siestas, or why we may tend to fall asleep a little bit more in the afternoon. And then it falls. And so you can see here that even as you reach 6 or 7 o'clock at night, even though your homeostatic drive is high for sleep, your circadian rhythm is not. And that's why you tend to stay awake during those 6, 7, 8 o'clock hours at night. And then what happens is that the drive to sleep quickly comes up, and now you have two very important determinants of sleep drive, which is homeostasis and circadian coming together, and that's why you should fall asleep. So it's important that these two drivers of sleep urge basically come together and are they're basically co-mingling, if you will. If they are working together, they are cooperative in terms of the drive to sleep. What can happen, however, is if your circadian rhythm gets shifted or switched, then you can have a problem with where this sleep urge is. For instance, if it were to be shifted to the right, if it were to be delayed, in other words, then you would have much less drive from the circadian rhythm to go to sleep, and that may cause insomnia. Furthermore, if it were to be shifted to the right in the morning, you would have a higher sleep drive, and that could make you basically have difficulty waking up in the morning. So as we've talked about before, exposure to bright light at night tends to delay your circadian rhythm, which is going to cause insomnia at the beginning of the night and hypersomnia in the morning when you're trying to get up. And the reason why this is all happening is because of the pathways. Let's talk about the pathways in the brain that's regulating this. So there's a master clock at the suprachiasmatic nucleus right here in the brain. Okay, so it's right there. And that is the conductor that is conducting this orchestra that's going on throughout the brain and the rest of the body. And so light comes into your eye. It hits these intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells in the lower portion of your retina and is transmitted the signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which tells it that it is day. And that's an important signal. When you tell the SCN that it is day, then it's going to want to do things that are related to the day, which means it's going to shut down the pineal gland and you're not going to have melatonin production. When you don't have this pathway, when you don't have melatonin, you're not getting important antioxidants. You're not getting the signal from your brain that it's time to sleep. And furthermore, the suprachiasmatic nucleus right here is going to think, aha, I am too early, because I thought it was nighttime, but I saw light. Therefore, I'm going to delay the circadian rhythm to make sure that it is coming at a later time. And so what you have here is, going back to our circadian rhythm, is that if you are exposing your eyes to light after 9 o'clock in this period of time, it's going to push to the right the circadian rhythm or delay it. On the other hand, if you were to take exogenous melatonin supplements, as some people do, you will have the opposite effect. It will tend to advance your circadian rhythm. Interestingly, at the beginning of the day, light has the opposite effect. And so if you were to expose your eyes to bright light, like for instance going outside into the sunshine at 100,000 lux, it's going to typically advance your circadian rhythm, and that's going to be better for you and actually offset what a majority of Americans have an issue with, which is light, too much light at night. Okay, so we've described a little bit about how you go to sleep and what are the forces involved in going to sleep. Let's talk about sleep itself, which is in this box here. The first part of your sleep is this first box here at the end, carries over to the morning, early morning hours when you're still sleeping here at the beginning of this graph. What it looks like, though, is something called a hypnogram, and you can see here that it's not just an on-off switch, but in fact there are several stages of sleep. So stage 1, 2, 3, and 4, this is deeper as you go down. And stage 3 and 4 is associated with non-REM or specifically delta wave sleep or slow wave sleep. This is the physically restorative sleep, this area right here. And as you can see, it's coming towards the beginning of the night. That's as opposed to REM sleep, which we see here with these red lines. And they typically are representing REM sleep, which is typically happening in the later portion of the night, as you can see here. So non-REM delta sleep is here at the beginning, REM sleep towards the end of the night. And you can see that here a little bit better. Delta sleep again towards the beginning, REM sleep towards the end. Delta sleep tends to be physically restorative. It's associated with growth hormone, Also associated with sleepwalking. And you may notice that if you have siblings that used to sleepwalk, it's typically at the very beginning of the night that they're going to sleepwalk, and that's because they're going into nice stage 3 and stage 4 sleep. And as we talked about before, if you are a student, for instance, and you're staying up late and you've got your eyes on the computer, it's going to delay your circadian rhythm. You'll see here going from red to pink. Notice what happens at night when you're trying to go to bed. You have less of a drive to go to sleep from your circadian rhythm. And when you're trying to get up in the morning, you have a higher sleep drive, a sleep urge, which means you're not going to get out of bed very easily. Okay, so let's talk about how much sleep you should be getting. So most adults, starting right about here, notice should be getting about 7 hours of sleep per night. That's the bare minimum. Those that are in high school should be getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep here as teenagers. And of course, as you get younger, it just goes up and up and up, even to 12 hours of sleep for a newborn infant. So this is important. The reason why this is important is because it affects just about every system of your body. So here was a study that was looking at how sleep affected the immune system. This was published in JAMA back in 2002. And they looked at 25 subjects. It was randomized to sleep versus sleep deprivation. They were given a flu shot, and they wanted to see how much of an antibody titer was seen in these patients. And so for 4 hours of sleep, that's pretty low. They had 0.5 levels of titer, whereas those that were able to sleep for as long as they wanted had over twice the antibody titer after vaccination. So if you are wanting to have a good immune response to either a vaccine or a virus, and you want to get better quickly, the recommendation would be to make sure you're getting adequate amounts of sleep. Remember, this was a randomized study, so a lot of the confounders are probably going to be whipped out of this because those confounders should self-select to both sides of that randomization. So the authors said here, these results indicate that the response to influenza vaccination is likely to be impaired in individuals who suffer from chronic partial sleep restriction. Because adults who show poor responses to vaccines and other antigenic challenges also experience higher rates of clinical illness, our findings support the concept that adequate amounts of sleep are needed to maintain resistance to infectious challenge. Well, here's another study. This time it was a kind of a prospective trial, 153, and what they did was they actually looked at the quality of sleep after dropping drops of rhinovirus into students' nares. So basically, they were infecting them on purpose, and they wanted to know who actually came down with clinical symptoms. And what they showed was that if you had a poor quality of sleep, 7 hours versus 8.5 hours or 8 hours plus, you were 2.9 times more likely to have clinical symptoms of infection. Those who had less quality of sleep, less than 92% versus 98+%, that's just looking at the equation of how many hours do you actually sleep divided by the number of hours that you're actually in bed. You can see there that good quality sleep was associated with 5.5 times more likely, bad quality of sleep had a 5.5 times more likelihood of getting infected. So bad sleep, higher risk of getting infection with a cold. Here's another reason to get good sleep. Melatonin can bind both SARS-CoV-2 and ACE2, potentially blocking viral entry. So again, the use of melatonin or the secretion of melatonin at night could actually be very, very beneficial. All right, what about sleeping and studying? I see this a lot in students and teenagers, is pulling all-nighters and drinking coffee and sleeping in increments. What are the benefits or the risks of doing this? So this was a number of articles. There was published one back in 2018. They took 6 healthy men in their 20s. They stayed at a research center without any cell phones or screens. They slept for 2 days at night, baseline. And they basically transitioned to staying awake at night and eating at night and sleeping during the day. They kind of just flipped to see what would happen. So the researchers took blood samples every 4 hours on well over 1,000 different proteins. And what they found was that a good amount of them, 10% in this case, of the proteins switched their peak time, and that many of these changes appeared by the second day. Folks, there was another separate study that showed that over 50% of our body's genes have a specific regulation attached to the circadian system, and that certain times of the day, certain genes go up. They even went as far as to say that there are certain side effects from medicines that you're more likely to see at certain times of the day versus others because of this mitigation of circadian rhythm. But we get back to the question here is which proteins did they see that switched peak times? And these are not unimportant enzymes. This is glucagon, which has to do with glucose metabolism. There's FGF19, which actually boosts calorie burning. And what they found in these students that did this and did it all-nighter is that there was less calorie burning, which give a increased risk for weight gain. They said here the study showed that staying awake at night and sleeping during the day for even just one 24-hour period can rapidly lead to changes in more than 100 proteins in the blood, including ones that have an effect on blood sugar, immune function, and metabolism. Over time, these biochemical changes in the blood levels can elevate your risk for health issues such as diabetes, weight gain, and even cancer. So, is it bad for your health to pull an all-nighter? I would say probably yes. Dr. David Ernst, a PhD and professor at Texas A&M College of Medicine, said that sleep deprivation's effect on working memory is staggering. Your brain loses efficiency with each hour of sleep deprivation. So you really want to try to avoid this. If you want to study, do it in small increments. Make sure that you're always using it. It's kind of fruitless to prepare just a few hours beforehand because your brain is just not going to be able to rehearse, especially if it's sleep deprived. He says, quote, "I tell our medical students that verbal rehearsal is what moves content from short-term to long-term memory. Repeating information, whether loud or verbalizing it in your thoughts, helps spur this process forward." And so as the day progresses into night, your brain's performance significantly decreases. So by studying all night, you're essentially swimming upstream. Folks, it's kind of like if you've got to go into LA and the traffic is really bad, do you go when there's no traffic or do you go during rush hour? Those two experiences are vastly different. You're actually going the same distance, but it's very, very different. And so try to do things when your circadian rhythm is optimized to behave during those times. All right, well, what about sleep before midnight? We just talked about the near term in terms of when you go to sleep and the delta wave sleep, the delta sleep or the slow wave sleep that happens at the beginning. Typically, a lot of that happens before midnight. And so Dr. Simon Kyle, who is a sleep expert in the UK, asked this question. You get better sleep before midnight. Is this a fact or is this sleep fiction? And he says here, it's actually during the first third of the night that we experience the deepest part of our sleep. We move into deep sleep more rapidly, and it's the phase of sleep during which we're least likely to be disturbed and wake up. It's also the most restorative part of our sleep. We experience low levels of stress hormone cortisol, as well as reductions in sympathetic nervous system activity. This is the stimulating activity associated with our fight or flight responses. We also experience increased parasympathetic nervous system activity, which is associated with rest and digest activity. And so because of that, you can see why slow wave sleep is so important. Well, in addition to all that, it's also involved with memory consolidation, learning ability, alertness, and it's starting to see that when we are looking at slow wave sleep, it's really important in terms of keeping our brain and body in optimal health. You really want to make sure that your slow wave sleep is optimized. So how can you tell whether or not you are at risk for having issues with sleep? Are you sleep deprived? Are you not getting enough sleep before midnight? If you were to answer yes on 3 or more of these questions, then there's a very good chance that you're sleep deprived. So do you need an alarm clock to wake up? Is it a struggle to get out of bed? Do you hit the snooze button several times to get more sleep? Are you feeling tired, irritable, stressed out, trouble concentrating, slow with critical thinking, fall asleep watching TV, boring meetings, after heavy meals, after relaxing after dinner, within 5 minutes of getting into bed, drowsy while driving, extra hours on weekend mornings? Do you sleep in? Do you have a nap to get through the day? Do you have dark circles around your eyes? All of these are risk factors for you being extra sleepy. And as we've talked about before, we know that there are certain hours that we need to have normally to make sure that we're getting adequate rest. And I'll tell you, for adults, it's at least 7 to 9, if not more. Because the issue is, as students, we are going to be under a lot of stress. We're going to be under a lot of studying. Our eyes are going to be exposed to bright light on computer monitors, and that could shift our circadian rhythm to the right, causing us to have issues with insomnia at night, not getting to bed at the right time, and hypersomnia in the morning. So what should we do to help prevent that? Here's some things that we always talk about. We talk about it here. We talk about it on our channel at megcram.com. We try to find things that we can actually do. So what are those things? Maintain a regular sleep routine. Avoid naps if possible. Don't stay awake in bed for more than 5 to 10 minutes. Don't watch TV or read in bed if you have issues with insomnia. Drink caffeinated drinks with caution. I would just actually say even a step further. I would just avoid caffeinated drinks. There's some recent research that seems to indicate that caffeinated beverages takes away from executive function and causes us to purchase things in stores that are frivolous and have higher bills. There was a recent study that sort of looked at that, found it to be very interesting. Avoid inappropriate substances that interfere with sleep. Exercise regularly. Have a quiet, comfortable bedroom. If you are a clock watcher at night, hide the clock. Have a comfortable pre-bedtime routine. So it's kind of difficult to really try to find in every single individual what their sleep problem is. I'm a sleep specialist. I see patients in the clinic. They come to me with insomnia, and really with a lot of people, it's not one size fits all. There's obviously a lot of different issues that are going on in individuals' lives. Sometimes it's a medical problem that's causing them to not be able to stay asleep. Maybe their prostate is enlarged and they have to get up and go to the bathroom a lot at night. Sometimes it's sleep apnea. They wake up in the middle of the night gasping for air, and as a result of this, they can't sleep. They need to be treated. And so in that case, getting them tested and treated for sleep apnea is going to be the issue. Other people have times when they just can't fall asleep. They're out in the kitchen, they're out in the living room, and they start to feel sleepy. And as soon as they walk into the bedroom, they have issues with falling asleep. And this could be psychological, could be that they're associating insomnia and inability to sleep with their bedroom. And as soon as they walk in, those subconscious thoughts are coming back. So it's really it's not easy to always one size fits all. I can tell you this, that taking sleeping pills or sleeping medications is not the long-term answer when people are having difficulty sleeping. So what to do? If you are on a sleeping pill already, what we need to do is get you sleeping better. And there's a lot of tips here that we've talked about in terms of what to do at bedtime. So never really want to stay in bed if you are not falling asleep. You want to get out of bed and make sure that you're not associating that bedroom with failure. If you're on a sleep medication already, stopping that, maybe perhaps you're already dependent on it, it could make your sleep in the short run worse. So be prepared for that. But really getting to the root cause of why you're not having sleep is going to be the important thing, and then tapering off that medication to eventually getting off. What about over-the-counter sleep aids like Benadryl? Well, these all are anticholinergic and antihistamines, and there's been some recent data that has connected those type of medications to increasing dementia. So it's not causal definitely at this point, but there is definitely an association. And so I really would not recommend some of these things that you can do over the counter to try to fall asleep at night. Some of the herbal things can also have risks, especially kava, which can cause issues with liver problems and things of that nature. So you've got to be careful about what it is that you're taking for sleep, because not everything that you take is going to be beneficial. A lot of people take melatonin. So the problem that I see with melatonin is that usually they take far too high of a dose, with melatonin. You really want to take somewhere between 1 to 3, maybe 1 to even 5 milligrams of melatonin. If you start going higher than that, you do get an antioxidant effect, but it actually causes irritation. And paradoxically, it's going to make falling asleep even worse. So just be aware of that. So sleep is a complicated topic. We do need to get it more. There's some of us that can, just fall asleep whenever we want to. And for some of us, we're not getting that sleep. We should start to do that. There's others of us who try to go to sleep and they just can't get it. And it's very frustrating. They only wish they could get more sleep, but their body isn't allowing them to do that. So if you go to my website, medcram.com, and you look under browse courses there'll be a free course there on insomnia, and we go through in a little bit more detail about how to battle insomnia. I highly recommend that you check us out there at medcram.com. But for now, we've talked about sleep, and I think that we all should try to get better sleep at night. And I think we can. I think this is something that we should be able to do if we put our minds to it and treat it and tackle it in the way that we should be. So for that, this is Physical Health Tuesdays, and I thank you for joining us here at Living Manna.